Welcome back to Life as an Artist. So, there are so many things going on this week in the vlog, and normally I tend to just document one project like from start to finish. But I'm trying to show you a bit more of my week in my life as an artist, and this week that's kind of the first time I'm going to be doing that. So first off, we kind of start with a small painting, and then we move on to working with some medium paintings, and then we finish with a rather large painting. Yeah, I want to jump straight to the studio with the small painting. So I made this frame a while back. It's a little bit experimental in the sense that it's a kind of DIY board or whatever you want to call it, with a frame around the back. And the intent with this was to make a very thin, the camera's not really capturing it so much, but it's a really thin edge, and that's to replace like debond, where you actually print onto a surface. A friend of mine uses this method, and I thought, well, it's a ridiculous amount of money to pay for the service that they do, and surely I could figure out a way to make it. So this was the initial prototype, and we figured out a way to make it which is much nicer. But basically I was left with this frame. Instead of re-stretching it, what I can actually do is start painting on it, and then when the painting is finished and dry, I can take it off that stretcher and put it on a special stretcher that I make specifically for that piece. That way it gives me a bit of gives me a bit of freedom, so I can actually cut the piece up into several different pieces if I like, or I can keep it intact and it will remain as it is. So that's what's going on. I'm going to jump in using the ochre paint that I've made, possibly some other paints, not decided quite yet. We'll see how it works out. This one's going pretty well, the colour scheme's quite nice, and I'm going to leave that basically as is with no extra oil paint, only the paint that I've made and collected from the ochre. This one, as I'm painting, we'll find out what happens. So this painting, just like last week's one, begins with an initial layer of charcoal. This is just to get something down the canvas and something that you can then work from. I put these kind of primordial squares and lines down there, you know, very intuitive and kind of meditative, and that comes through, you know, doing many of these paintings, and you kind of develop this intuition in the same sort of way as when you play a musical instrument. At a certain point you can just kind of free flow, if that makes sense. So once those initial shapes are down, I highlight them and pick them out in the colours that I've made, and these squares just keep getting built and built layer upon layer. And I like to work in many layers normally, but like I stated before, I'm just working with these initial first layers, so I'm trying to make it a bit more final than ordinarily I do. And yeah, it's kind of getting there right now. It's just that little top kind of bit to fill in, and I want to leave some of that canvas open because it's also a nice colour in itself. And basically the painting is about complete now. From that painting we're going to jump over to Donald's studio. I'm down in Rontel Studios, which I'm struggling to pronounce, but it's where Donald's based. This is the main kind of atrium here. This is where everyone has their studios, and Donald's in here. And today we're going to be stretching and framing. Yeah, what is it exactly we're doing today, actually?
Stretching and framing.
So we're actually putting, because I didn't talk about it the other day, we're putting frames on. You have like proper frames that we're framing it with.
Ah, like that. No, if we have time we'll frame those two over here, these pieces.
Yeah.
And we're going to stretch the canvases.
Okay.
But we're going to see how far we'll get.
And then the only other thing is, I don't know if you saw this huge new table, and we had the installation of that the other day, which you can see now. So Donald has this process, and I wouldn't go far as to say it's a secret process, but it's sort of a secret process. But it requires a very large surface to paint on. And for a while I've been struggling and doing it on the floor, and finally he's bought this very large 5 metre by 2 metre table, and this is essentially the installation of us putting that into his room. It was an absolute nightmare to get through the door, as you can see on the footage, but eventually it got in the room. The other thing is Donald's got a good friend coming down, Anushka, and does she make films, or is this a bit of a hobby for her?
She does all sorts of things with cameras.
Okay. All sorts of things with cameras. So she's coming down to essentially make a film about us stretching the canvases, and I'm making a vlog about her making a film about us stretching the canvases.
Not confusing.
Not confusing at all. It's like Inception. frame within a frame within a film within a film, and we'll jump in and start stretching. I'll explain what it is we're doing. So first off, maybe a little bit of background information about what is going on here. So for a while I've been doing this, what we call a labour exchange between me and Donald, which is where he comes and helps me in my studio and vice versa, I help him in his. And this week it's my turn to come and help him. Now Anushka's filming as we're doing this, but basically we're just clearing this new table and putting down protective bubble wrap. Then we're putting the pieces upside down and then putting them on top of the stretcher. And then we're carefully stapling and stretching each canvas. The reason we're doing this is the way Donald works. He can't paint it on the stretcher, so we basically have to stretch it on a canvas once that's finished. Okay, so we're mid in the first stretch now. Donald's just sizing up the canvas properly and cutting it to length. Anushka's deep in filming, I believe. And yeah, in a moment we're going to start stretching and actually pulling the canvas so it's taut across the frame. He's doing it in reverse to most artists, as I do. Yeah, stretch the canvas first, prime it and then paint it, and obviously with the way Donald paints we have to do it in this reverse process. It makes it slightly more tricky, but we're professionals, we know what we're doing, right? I partly make this joke because yeah, this is actually one of the first times Donald's been working with canvases. He's been painting a long time, but usually fixing it to debond post the paint. These are just some shots of us actually stapling, and I'm sorry if it gets a little bit boring, but there is rather a lot of stapling to be done when you're stretching a canvas. So yeah, this is yeah, a speed up of us finishing this canvas off, and once that's done we'll move on to the next. There were 5 of them or so that were done that day, and this is one of the reveals of when the piece was finished.
24 hours later.
Yeah, we actually got straight back to it the next day. Yeah, the day before we only really managed to stretch, I think, 2, and we were doing a bit of photography as well that I didn't actually record, but it was a bit last minute with the photography. So the day after I came back and we carried on working on the pieces that he had to be done. I think by the end of this day we had all 5 pieces stretched and finished. So yeah, I was saying that Donald's not really used to working this way and it's a bit new for him. That's because he usually works with fixing the canvases on debond, but for this series of work he really wanted to start stretching them on canvas, which is a bit more traditional and also a bit more versatile in its yeah, mounting nature. You don't need to rely on debond or well, it's not even that you don't need to rely on something, it's a nicer presentation method for this particular set of work.
One debt to society later.
So after helping Donald in the studio yesterday and the day before, I went down to my studio the day after, and I'm doing a bit of prototyping for a mural that I will be, if we're talking chronologically, in fact doing tomorrow, but that'll be featuring in next week's vlog. This mural is the first time I'm painting on such a large wall, and a bit of background information. I've got an exhibition coming up at the end of the year, and in this gallery they're all also interested in graffiti work and kind of temporal work. So the idea is that it's not going to be this permanent piece, it's that the piece goes up, we do a recording of it and make a film out of it, and then the piece is painted over basically. But it's the first time I've done something on this scale, and before I went down and made a total mess up of it, I thought I'd just have a bit of a trial run. So I'm working with some imagery that I collected from my recent trip to Australia. There was this ironbark tree that had this very kind of unique pattern, and obviously I work with squares. There's this idea about the similarity between us all as humans. And yeah, I'm going to stop talking here though and talk while the piece is going on. Yeah, we'll jump in now. So I just first off need to clear up the space, and once I've cleaned up the space I just mount a scrap piece of canvas to the wall. Now going back to this ironbark that I was just mentioning, I work with squares within my work. If you've seen any of my vlogs before, I'm sure you're quite aware of that. And this is about, you know, depicting the kind of similarities as human beings, and yet, you know, the uniqueness. Every square is individual and different. But I wanted to try and ground this in reality a bit more and paint with, or depict a painting from reality. So I have this really beautiful picture of this ironbark tree, and that's the image that I've just shown right now for you. And this ironbark tree was taken in North Queensland, along with a bunch of other source material, and I thought I'd just first off loosely sketch that out and then work into this loose sketch with the paint. So I work with these primary colours, you know, black, white and red tend to be my focus, and I thought I'd just start splashing around and kind of picking up and depicting and picking out certain squares from those initial first marks that were based on that ironbark photo. I was quite happy with how most of it turned out, and I think it'll translate into the mural next week when I scale it up probably by a factor of 10. It's going to be a really nice big 5-metre wall, I believe, and yeah, I'm quite excited for really having a go at doing it. This is the final layer now that you can see me putting on. I just put a kind of a couple of tubes of oil paint on the finish, and that was to give it this depth that my work tends to have. I think when I actually do it in reality over on the wall, I'll end up doing it in acrylic rather than oil, as you know, it's got to set as quickly as possible basically, and if you have those oil paintings on there, sometimes it can take months and months and months before the paintings dry. Yeah, so I hope you liked me showing you a bit more of my week from kind of start to finish rather than me focusing just in on one project. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you, I hope, again next week. Take care, and bye.